Tell me one thing, Burke. You're going out there to destroy them, right? Not to study, not to bring back, but to wipe them out.
It's just one of those things managed to wipe out my entire crew in less than 24 hours. And if the colonists have found that ship, then there's no telling how many of them have been exposed. Do you understand?
I ain't much for begging. Nobody ever gave me nothing. So I say, fuck that thing. Let's fight it.
Let's rock!
Hey everyone, you're listening to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, and today we're here with a slightly overdue and very exciting roundtable conversation on Alex White's recent novel, The Cold Forge, by Titan Books, which we're super excited to talk about, and we've all loved, and we've got a lot to say. So without further ado, I'm Patrick, and I'm here with...
Clara, also known as Mother 9000.
And David from Xenomorphing and contributor at this lovely podcast.
Yes, and we are really excited to be here together to talk about this. Now, David, I know you've worked a 74-hour shift, so you're a little tired. I think we're all in different boats tonight. But this is something we've been talking about for a long time and wanting an excuse.
Needs me. What are you going to do?
You can't say no to that, you know. And I know I've personally been really just waiting for an excuse just to talk about this in general because I just love this book so much. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Clara, what are some of your upfront thoughts? I know you've talked to Alex before. You've done some great interviews with him. But in general, what are your thoughts on this book?
I really, really, really love the premise. Firstly, to do with the transhumanism aspect, because I would love to have a robot body, or even love to transfer my consciousness into a robot. So this was like a dream come true for me. I couldn't put the book down. I really could identify with Blue Marsalis because I worked in a lot of I worked for corporations that are pretty heartless, and I've always had to do things for them which I never really agreed with, and in some ways I've always tried to make it to my benefit, which Blue really does in the book. On a next level, but yeah, I really...
in a pretty deep way, I would say she tries to make it work for her benefit.
Exactly.
And actually, just a brief aside for people who are listening to this who haven't read it yet, don't, because there's going to be spoilers in this, because we're going to talk pretty thoroughly about the actual plot points. So if you haven't read it yet, shame on you. You should be reading it right now, and also come back to this episode and bookmark it for later. But go ahead, Clara. Sorry about that.
That's okay. And I really love how devious Dorian is, and his character is just he's a new level of asshole we haven't seen in the Alien universe. He kind of wrestles for top spot against Burke, I think. So yeah, it's a really great book.
Well, there's something kind of hapless about Burke, you know, like he's just sort of this like aw shucks opportunist who's like also kind of a sociopath. But Dorian is a totally different breed, I think. So we're going to talk more about him as we go on. But just getting initial thoughts. Dave, what do you think?
I absolutely fucking loved it. I was a couple chapters in and I'm like, shit, I don't want to do anything else but finish reading the book. It was probably the best novel I've read in the Aliens universe in a long time. And I think it was a real breath of fresh air that kind of kicked the expanded universe right in its ass that I think it needed. It really just did just about everything right. Character-wise, to no one's surprise, I fucking love Dorian. Just like Claire just said, absolutely wonderful, beautiful, done asshole. I mean, he was just whole new level. Everything he did was just very intriguing. Very well written, and what I liked about him, other than him just being an entertaining asshole, was the way he reacted when he eventually saw what the creatures were and what they did, like his fascination with them, which is something I can, a lot of us fans could attest to. When we first saw them or read about them, we're like, whoa, kind of like Starship Troopers. Yes, I would like to know more. And it's just he just became obsessed with it, which is, definitely something, I could definitely connect with. I just thought it was just great. I just couldn't get enough.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. Before I get to my thoughts, I want to read a couple from Connor Murdoch, who is one of our mods for Building Better Worlds. So we've actually done a little bit of revamping, but just, kind of side business here, on Building Better Worlds, our social media group. And we've got some new mods in place, and we've got some really cool ideas for conversation points and things. So we're really trying to put energy into that, so make sure you check it out. But Connor sent some thoughts for this episode that I wanted to read because they're really good. He said the biggest thing that he took away from the novel would be the two primary characters. Blue Marsalis is a character who he struggled to nail down her true motivation because he wasn't sure if she wanted to help people with her discovery or if this was just sort of a lie that she told herself to justify her desire to heal herself, which Clara was kind of hinting at earlier. And he also says Dorian is one of the few villains in a story where he truly loves to hate him. What's more terrifying is that people like him probably do exist in positions of power in our world. His fascination with the aliens molds his demented perception of his own being to the point of imagining he's one of them, to the point of sinking his teeth into someone. What a great fucking scene that was. Oh my god, that was so scary! It's very difficult to write a true psychopath, but it's pulled off well in the story. And then lastly, he says that it's clear that Alex White was really influenced by alien isolation because the xenomorphs are portrayed with a real weight to their movement and their presence, and they've been influenced by sound and light as Dorian gains access to the controls of the Cold Forge and proceeds to guide them towards Blue through the light guidance system, which I think was really cool technology. And also things like characters hiding behind furniture, etc. And lastly says that Marcus is also a very interesting synthetic in that he kills someone under Blue's control and subsequently begins to despise her and himself for a violation of his core programming. So there's a bunch of things in there that I want to make sure we get to. Before we do, I'll just share my personal thoughts on it. I thought it was just an absolutely fantastic new take on a lot of established canon that was really refreshing to me and felt genuinely scary and interesting. And I think it's important to note that we've all talked a lot about character, because I think a lot of the time in novels like this, and especially in the sort of quote-unquote expanded universe novels, it's easy for the characters to be left behind in the service of the tropes that we are really, we're all reading an alien novel, to find out about people getting face hugged and, giving birth to xenomorphs. I'm sorry, our cat in the background is breaking something. I don't know if you can hear that. Speaking of predators, there's certain reasons you read an alien. You read an alien novel to get horror, sci-fi things, and to have those kind of things delivered on. But the fact that the characters in this book are so rich, I think, is really fascinating. Also, I think setting it in this Cold Forge environment, I think is a really interesting layout, and it was very visual. And I think that Alex did an amazing job of being very clear on the spatial relationships between things, so that it was very clear where people were within the ship and the operating system, all that kind of stuff, which we'll get into. And I loved how novel Marcus felt, because I feel like we've seen so many synthetics in the Alien universe at this point that to do something really new was really refreshing. Like Clara said, I thought it was so cool that we got to sort of have this transhumanistic aspect where, Blue was piloting him. I also thought it was cool that we had a disabled protagonist. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was a nice touch.
Right? That was a really cool touch.
Nice touch.
Also the fact that, she was a minority. It's only mentioned once in the whole thing, but it's just another... I mean, we saw that with Defiance, obviously, too, and other things. But it's nice to have this kind of a fresh take on somebody from a demographic standpoint as a hero. Well, I mean, I don't know if she's a hero, but...
I've mentioned in the past that I really wanted to have a trans character in the Alien universe, and this was a really unique way of making that happen, because you don't really get a sense of who she identifies as until the end, when she chooses, no, I want a male body.
Yes,
that's what I want.
Right, yeah,
So,
she ends up choosing that at the very end of the book.
Yeah, exactly. Because at first it was forced onto her, and you think that she is shouldering, this is really unfair that she's been put into this body that doesn't correlate with how she looks, but then at the end you're like, no, that's actually what she wanted all along.
Right.
And she didn't know it until it happened to her. So, it just put a whole new spin on it, which is great. I loved it.
And the fact that I feel like White does a really good job of elaborating the differences between gender and sexuality, and how there's much more going on than what you just might assume. Like Clara said, you have this outwardly female character who actually felt at home in a male synthetic body. There's a lot to that too that we should unpack when we talk about Marcus in a moment. A couple of other quick things I just wanted to point out. I love how firmly he sits it within the Alien canon as we know it. Like there's so many references. Like there's a David reference early on. There's references to to Carter Burke, as we mentioned. There's references to events in Aliens, especially because of where this sits within the timeline. There's all these great little nods to things in the cinematic universe that make it feel like it's really part and parcel of this sort of alien mythos, which I really appreciated. And I think the writing was really beautiful. I think he's a really gifted just storyteller, which is nice because sometimes these things can come out kind of workmanlike and not be that great, but I think he did a really good job writing an original literary treatment of it. And the last thing I want to say is, and this is something that I found out just before we recorded, and you guys know I was fanboying the shit out of this, is that he named RB232 after fucking Daniel Ricciardo, who is our mutual favorite Formula One driver, and I just shit my pants when I found that out, so that's a personal thing. But there are many levels of just total amazement in here. Before we get to characters, though, let's talk a little bit about some of the the xenomorphology going on here. Clara, you had some stuff to say about this, right?
Yeah, so Alex did a lot of research in terms of trying to come up with a scientific, genuine history for the xenomorph to actually exist. So he did some studies into the taxonomical tree and also got some help from a couple of scientists and a high school biologist, I believe, a science teacher, to help with naming and categorizing the facehugger and the black ooze. That they decided not to come up with a scientific name for the xenomorph because it takes its traits partially from the host and part of it is from the black ooze. So they just named the black ooze Plagiaris praeportans, which is thief in Latin, and prae means mighty in Latin. So Manamala noxhydria, which is the facehugger, means hand, and mala means bad or jawbone or evil or wrongdoing. So it's evil hand, and it's just really interesting the way he's come up with it. I've got the two blog posts I've made about it, talking about
both of which are really good, and I've read both of those. So check them out on Utani blog.
Yeah, I'll post the link up on the podcast when we publish it. But yeah, it's really interesting talking about how the black ooze could actually exist and how it can relate to everything that's happening in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, tying the universes together. He's done a really great job of like putting a bit of everything, from even Alien Isolation, putting Seegson into there. It's just magnificent way of tying it all together. And even the tech, you could even like imagine the cassette futurism that's in Alien Isolation, like the older tech, clunky keyboards and that sort of thing. She doesn't even have like a tablet, she's got a personal computer that she has to like, wrench out and use every single time she wants to be able to communicate with someone. So it definitely feels even of the Alien universe.
Even the technology that she uses for that interface, which is such a sort of a high sci-fi concept, is so analog, right? Like you're saying, it's like I love when she has to revert to like the garbage version of it. That's like, it just sounds like this like duct taped together like popsicle stick thing that accomplishes something magical, but it feels so tactile and so real.
Yeah, and I feel like it also ties into Prometheus with the visor helmet that he uses to communicate with Wayland.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem so far that Blue could be using very similar sort of technology to do this. Sort of like transhumanistic interchange with Marcus.
Good point. Dave, what do you think? What are some of your thoughts on the biology in this thing?
I thought it was great. I mean, just to echo what Clara said, the way he brilliantly just tied everything in without it being, overly obvious or obnoxious. It was done just in a very simple. I love the science of it. It was just, he made it all just seem like it was something that, that these aliens are something that could exist, and why. Like, I loved the studying they did of him, the way he had it set. I mean, it was almost like a more scientific Jurassic Park. I know it's kind of a dumbed down way of explaining it, but it was just so cool. And the way he used the black goo, the xenovirus, whatever you want to call it, was just awesome. The kind of way to explain how the DNA reflex was explained, which I can't believe that was something none of us even thought of before. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. That was probably my favorite part of the whole biology of it. I was reading that. I'm like, wait, hold up. What did I read? Let me reread that. I'm like, holy shit, that's clever as anything. Like, that's great. Oh, I just thought I'm like, that actually makes sense. I'm like, man, I mean, that's a great way of explaining how the DNA reflex works. I'm like, oh, all right, it's the virus adapting to whatever, the facehugger attaches itself to. I thought it was great. Right. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I love that too. I also think it's cool that he calls the xenomorph snatchers in this, because it's something that, we're all Xeno nerds here. We all are aware that it's technically not that xenomorph is the name for the classification of other organisms, and that you can call it XX121 or you can call it whatever you want.
Right.
But I like that he gave us a nice nerdy it's technically not a xenomorph. It fits into the category of xenomorphs, but we're going to call them snatchers. I kind of like that, and I think it's a pretty cool name for them.
Yeah, and I think he said the one time that the word xenomorph is used in the book, it's used in a very it's a joke. It's not even used in a very serious sort of way. So that's kind of funny.
Right. And also the fact that and for the purposes of this podcast, we'll still call them xenomorphs, but that the xenomorphs in this book are basically gorilla aliens, which to me, knowing my background, was a pretty big deal because I fucking love the gorilla kind of alien. But that they were for the most part, ape-born. And so they were physiologically different from the traditional upright snatchers that we know and love from, for example, Alien Isolation.
Yeah, I got really confused when I was reading it. Because I was picturing the gorilla alien, and the gorilla alien has a tail, but then chimpanzees don't have a tail, but xenomorphs born from humans have a tail, but we don't have tails?
Well, we do, but they're internal, right? Because we have the coccyx.
Yeah, it was...
So So when you see I guess, all right. So for example, Big Chap has a tail like nobody's business, but the Kenner gorilla alien has a tail like this little kind of bullwhip thing. So there might be some inconsistencies there with the physiognomy of the alien.
I was trying to picture it. I was like, so how does it? I'm like, wait, what? Hold on. Whatever. Right. I'll just think of something cool. And I'm still calling him Xenos. I'm still calling him Xenos, by the way.
I still call them Snatchers sometimes because I kind of like the name.
I like it too. It was refreshing, because I feel like we all in fandom run into this constant because we're always if somebody wants to call me out on calling it a xenomorph, I'm gonna have to get nerdy with them and level and be like, well, okay, I do understand that's a valid argument, but for the sake of just having a fucking a lingua franca here, we're gonna say xenomorph. But that being said, I thought it was super cool. I loved the whole the Cold Forge environment. I loved Juno. I loved all that shit.
I do give him credit for trying something different. I always applaud trying something different.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, there have been so many, even just the last few years between River of Pain. There's been so many books put out recently, especially on Titan, which I think we should take a second and recognize has been fucking great. The fact that we've had this sudden influx of new novels. It's amazing. Sea of Sorrows, River of Pain. There's been a ton of them in the last couple of years. Yeah. But it's always refreshing when you see somebody doing something new with these things.
Yes, 100%.
Totally with you on that. I loved even just the technological considerations that he took with things like the egg crate, the fact that the ovomorph was seated in this thing with lye that would explode. Like it's just, I just love that, and there are all these little Chekhov's gun
I felt like
villains.
it was very James Bond. Like,
Sounds like a good April Fool's joke too.
Right?
Go on, open it. Go on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just trust me, you'll love it. But that all these things are set up in the beginning when he's kind of guiding us through the operations on this wonderful bivalved space station, and then later on all these things end up being very pertinent to the actual real danger that these characters, especially Blue, find themselves in.
Yeah, that's what I love. All these details, they're not glossed over. Everything is introduced for a reason, and nothing is abandoned. I really love it.
Right, because it's easy for me, we talk about like the Dunning-Kruger effect, about how the less you know about something, the more confident you are that you could probably do it. Like for me, when I read like an in-universe novel, a lot of the time I have the sense of like, oh, I could do this. Like I can come up with some buttons that are going off in the background. Oh, they're in danger. Oh, like, oh great, okay, they got to run away. Oh, now they're gonna like go try to avoid getting sucked into the vacuum of space. I got it, But when I'm reading this book, I'm really struck by this constant sense of like, oh yeah, I could not do this. This is really masterful. And part of that, I think, is the fact that all this sort of production design aspects it's just so well thought out. And the fact that in the end, when Blue is piping into the power loader, it's a totally believable paradigm, even though, if the book hadn't been set up so rigorously, I would probably think it was ridiculous. But in this, I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense. He justified it by having such a rigorous layout to the technological world in which this novel operates. So I guess we probably want to talk a little bit about characters. Now, Marcus, I think, is a super interesting angle into, as Clara said, the transhumanist aspect. And I know this is your wheelhouse, Clara, so I want you to go ahead and take this off. What do you think about Marcus?
All right. So when we first get introduced with Marcus, and like I've read a lot of fan fiction, I must admit, but what I don't like is the romanticism between the humans and the androids. It feels very unrealistic in a way, mainly because I see the androids as caretakers, as in a way that they're an extension of Mother being there to take care of the humans through space, etc. So when Marcus was introduced, I was worried that he would become a romantic connection for Blue. What was interesting is that he maintained that sort of caretaker role. So he was there to take care of her and make sure she was comfortable, to make sure that she could survive, making sure she has her medication. And there was nothing sexual in the way that they interacted. It was all very loving, like family, if you get what I mean. What I found really interesting was the way that Blue used Marcus, and this is what the way I always say all the androids used in the alien universe is always to the humans' benefit. So that I'm going to bring up Prometheus, Fire and Stone, and the way that Elden was used as well. There's
Elden,
a certain sort of...
what up?
Yeah,
great character.
Exactly. Love Elden. But there's a certain sort of manipulation that humans justify their use of the androids because they want to extend their life and their comfort, and it's never to the consideration of their own creations. So you've got Marcus, who is then utilized to lie to the company, to initiate a romantic relationship which was consensual, and then to murder someone. So using this android without having any knowledge of what they're doing and what they're capable of, I think is just, it's all levels of wrong. Like, would you use another human like that, and how would you justify it? And I guess, we all do it every day, like inadvertently through our governments and that sort of thing, whether it be manipulating spies, manipulating actual robots like drones to carry out and do our dirty works. It brings to mind a lot of A lot of things that I don't like about humanity, but at the same time, I'm really relishing this sort of futuristic aspect that we're going to be experiencing soon with transhumanism and taking on the android body and maybe completely changing ourselves into data and getting rid of our physical biological bodies. Sorry, that was really long.
No, it's great. Keep going.
All right, that was good.
Yeah. So yeah, I find Marcus to be a very caring character. That's the way he was programmed. So like Patrick has said before, he's kind of like Walter, but I think he's kind of a bit more like Elden in a way that he's got less autonomy than Walter does. Walter kind of knows what he's supposed to do when he's not being controlled, whereas I feel Marcus, he knows what protocols are. He knows he's not supposed to cause harm. He's not supposed to do this, but he's always awaiting an order. So he's, I guess, less like Bishop, a bit more like Elden. You can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but that's the sort of feeling that I got. And there's nothing wrong with that.
That makes sense because he wasn't like he had the caring aspect, the following the orders and doing what's right of Walter and Bishop. But you nailed it. He's awaiting the orders. He's not he's not going to go out and just do something on his own. He needs to be told. It's more along those lines. So no, I think that's a fair enough comparison.
And I feel like at the end as well, but when he's got Blue and Blue's shut in cryosleep and Marcus is losing it and going a bit crazy, you kind of see how her manipulation of him, making him think that, oh yeah, what you're doing was right. It was the right thing to do to kill that guy. It was the right thing to try to help me. You can kind of see how David, even though he's got his own autonomy, could be easily manipulated by his father to, test the black goo on the crew and try to, extend someone's life, even though it wasn't his father's. He ends up doing it to Shaw. Just all of these sorts of things. It starts to all click and make sense that, manipulation, whether you do it to a robot or to a human being, is not right.
Yeah.
It's just all levels of wrong. Yeah. Well, sorry, you were going to say something?
Well, I think there's a deep level of childlikeness to a lot of these synthetics in the universe in general. And I think that Elden is a great example of that, right? Because his whole huge descent into his final meatball, final boss battle mode basically starts with the deception, right? With he feels like, why would my friend betray me? And likewise, I feel like when Marcus is forced through Blue's hand to kill Kambili Okoro, her assistant, he feels like that is just this enormous betrayal. And I love when he comes back online and he's like, he really sounds like a petulant child. And as a dad of two young children who are frequently petulant, it felt very real to me. The fact that he was like, well, I'll do what you say, but you're an idiot because you told me to break my programming protocol. The fact he's very vindictive about it. And I don't blame him because it's like a doctor betraying the Hippocratic Oath. It's something anathema to what he represents and what he's supposed to do. Like Clara, like you were saying, he's such a caretaker. There's such a deep sweetness to him as he's like getting her, helping with her stomas on her stomach, and he's like putting in her feeding tube and he's giving her the pills. And in my head, especially because the physical description of him sounded like Michael Fassbender a lot, I was picturing Walter, being like, take your pills, it's time. I was picturing his voice in my head the whole time. I don't dream at all,
Yeah.
And there's such a deep, abiding sweetness to Walter, which is part of why I love him so much. He's like a dog, that feeling that betrayal really hurt because it was not okay. So what's so interesting about Blue, and we'll get to her in a moment, what's so interesting about Blue is that it's very difficult to discern exactly where her motivations lie, because Alex is consistently setting her up as the protagonist, right? Like, we are conditioned to see, for one thing, she's outwardly biologically female, so we're kind of used in the Alien universe to looking at, like we're looking for the kind of female heroine because we've been conditioned with this kind of Ripley model, right? She's also the one who's trying to save life. She's also the one who's obviously outgunned in this scenario. Like, she's an extremely imperfect entity, Like, she seems like she's the underdog. She's who we're rooting for. But what's so great is that White is continually challenging our suppositions by making her motivations kind of unclear. And her manipulation of Marcus when she makes him crush Okoro's throat, it's like, oh shit, like that was in the, you can look at it from a utilitarian standpoint, and you can say, oh, she needed to get that sample off the station, off RB-232, because she needed to, like, save humanity. But the reality is she's living with a ticking time bomb inside of her in the form of this genetic disorder. So, like, this was also very self-serving, and it was, in doing that, putting Marcus in a position that was existentially horrible for him. So, and I'm like trying hard not to transition into our Shoulder of Orion podcast here with the conversation on artificial intelligence. It's tough because there's a lot of crossover. But I do feel like there's something to be said. If you look at Marcus as an outwardly human entity in terms of having personhood, which I think it's hard not to, because he's set up like this very loving, empathetic person, even regardless of whether or not he actually is, you can't help but feel some tremendous empathy for him when he's put in that position. And then, of course, his ultimate redemptive heroism, in the end, as he's like, this crawling, destroyed, melted thing. I just think he's such an interesting take on this synthetic trope that we've seen quite a lot, and I just was really grateful to have a new angle on that.
I think as well with that, it really shows, because we always focus on the crew expendable part. We never really see the androids as part of the crew. So, when, Bishop, for example, in Alien 3 was too damaged, he was just thrown onto the junk heap. There was no consideration for him. Only Ripley was cared enough to kind of see what sort of condition he was in and whether he wanted to keep living. And it was the same with Marcus. Marcus at the end, who knows if he could have been, repaired or anything like that. They discarded him just as easily. So my heart really, really, I cried a lot when Marcus was discarded, and we didn't really have some sense of a proper ending for him. But that's just the way it goes in the Alien universe.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I was about to say that's how it goes in the that's par for the course.
Yeah.
Happy endings? Nope. Sorry. Get
and
ready for it.
But it's important that that the alien fiction, I think, corresponds with that. Like, I feel like it's something that we talk about that so much on this podcast, about how there is a fundamental nihilistic bent to the alien universe. Like, Ripley's noble ending is her fucking killing herself. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, even the heroes in this universe have tragic ends that are tragic in the context of an ultimately heroic act, but they're still really, really tragic. Like, nobody goes home and just raises a family and is happy again, No,
it's well, I guess from my point of view, it's very realistic the way they depict certain situations, well, in the certain movies at least, certain situations, and what's going to happen. There's no white picket fence, there's no puppies, there's no whatever you think your favorite character is all set to live happily after. No, he's probably birthing a xenomorph somewhere. It's not happening.
Right. Not only is he not living happily ever after, but he's having the worst end to his life you could possibly imagine.
He might be taking care of a baby, not the baby you thought he was, but alas.
Right. He's giving birth, I guess. I do kind of love how that's Dorian's end. It's like it's like my progeny.
He's just such a pretentious asshole. Of course, he would be doing a painting as he's dying, and his
so
own
ridiculous.
Blood is the final.
I know, it's so ridiculous.
I want to be,
but I loved it.
So fitting.
My masterpiece.
So, I will be the best xenomorph ever.
Yeah, and he probably would be. You guys want to talk a little bit about Dorian?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, I'll go after. So, Dave, kick this off. What are your thoughts on him?
One of the most entertaining characters I've read or seen on screen between comics, movies, and the games in a long time. Just very, very compelling. I mean, even the first couple of pages, like, wow, this guy's a jerk. I can't wait to read more. Like, you just everything he did. Like when you first, the beginning, it was all about the company, getting the books right, not caring how he went to scientists. He got a kick out of firing scientists. He thought it was the funniest thing ever. He couldn't wait to fire scientists. Anything to get the books right, get that bonus. That's it. His only real connection was to his little crew that helped him, hop from planet to planet and getting the Weyland-Yutani books right. And he originally just went into, the Cold Forge just for another job. And then when he realized the beautiful beast, you just saw him, his arrogance and Dorian ways just came out even more. He did not care who was in his way. He wanted to be the one to control the creatures, to have them used as they should be. And it was just, anytime you thought he couldn't get any worse, or you thought he was going to maybe turn the corner, hey, Dorian's figured out. Yeah, no, not so much. He just didn't give a shit about anything or anyone except what he needed to do, and did not care what he needed to do to get there. It was just great entertainment. You couldn't wait to see what ridiculous thing he was going to do next.
Well, and because there's and Clara, I want you to go next, but before I get back to you, just briefly, there's something wonderful about having this haunted house scenario where the xenomorph is not the actual ghost in the haunted house for once. Like, the actual villain is just a person who's a psychopath, and who has at his beck and call the ultimate killing weapon. And just very briefly, one of my favorite things is that, like you're saying, Dave, like there were so many moments where I would be like, where Alex White puts us in his head, and you're like, oh my God, what a just abject, terrible person this is. And then what he would say would be so outwardly charming.
Oh man, I know.
And I love how he nailed that, because that's how psychopaths operate, right? Yeah. It's like their internal life is so devoid of empathy and concern for other people, but then what they're able to say is very, like Ted Bundy is very convincing. Clara, what do you think?
I think that. Oh, sorry, you go.
One thing I did like you were saying what we were saying before with Blue, is he did such a great job with both of them with their intent. You're like, what are they? You weren't quite sure who was really the bad guy here. I thought that was just beautifully done. Just have to throw that in there. Sorry.
That's all good. Okay, Dorian. Now, I dated a guy like this once. A long time ago, and he is, oh man, so fucked up. He is he's a piece of work. So this sort of person, everything is a game of dominance and about winning, and like Alex has said in the past, for Dorian, someone always has to lose, and it's never him. And if you go through life like that, you're obviously not going to make any friends or connections, and Dorian just relishes in the fact that he is a lone wolf, that he doesn't need to depend on any, and he prides himself on being able to predict people's moves. And having been with a person like this, like, oh, I'm going to manipulate this person, and this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. And it would happen, and then they would just relish in like, oh, I knew that was going to happen. I told you so. And I'm like, well, fucking great, good for you. It's so weird, and to be put into his mindset and kind of see things unravel, and the split second decisions that he makes in order to put himself on top again is interesting. What I like, though, the fact that he's presented as such a ruthless asshole who relishes his job a little too much, is that he gets dominated by someone he thinks is very stupid sexually in this book, which is, I think that's great. I think it really nails the sort of character that he is. He is always constantly looking for someone to challenge, and I think he eventually finds that challenge in Blue because he severely underestimates her. Even there's like the tiny mind games that Blue plays with him by taking his cigarettes away. You know, the one thing that he relishes. Just little things like that.
That was awesome.
I loved it because I could see that happening.
Yeah.
I was like having a little celebration every time he reached for his cigarettes and he couldn't find them there. It was just great.
You just know exactly what the look on his face is. It's just what the fuck?
God, freaking.
And I also found it interesting that at one point Dorian takes control of Marcus and kind of Blue is kind of left to fend for herself. I really liked the fact that Marcus was not really on anyone's side, but he was always being used, and he was being used by Blue and he was being used by Dorian. So it put another dimension to the whole, like the sort of triangle between them of survival. That's all I've got to say about it.
Yeah.
He is such a sweetie.
I love Marcus. Make sure you take your pills. So I was struck the whole time with Dorian by how much he resembled Al Dunlap, who I have not actually asked Alex White about, but have you guys ever heard of Al Dunlap before? It's okay if you haven't. I'll explain who he is.
No, I haven't.
So I first was introduced to him in the context of John Ronson's The Psychopath Test, which was this amazing book that he did on the characteristics of a psychopath and some figures who may or may not fit it in the past. And so Al Dunlap was this guy who basically was called Chainsaw Al, and he was brought in to companies that were performing poorly. Like, so for example, in the mid-90s, he went to Sunbeam, which makes a lot of kind of consumer appliances and electronics. And he would create these huge earning booms for these companies by basically just firing like fucking everybody. And like doing it so cutthroat and with such a fetishization of the act of firing people. So like he basically lived in a mansion that was filled with just statues of like predators, like these golden fucking leopards and eagles. And his whole business idea was based around this notion of survival of the fittest. And so he did this for other companies as well. And eventually, of course, he was sued, and then he was found out to be this incredibly corrupt person and was completely basically just shut out of history as this evil dude who was very clearly a psychopath. But there's something in his fetishization of dominance that really struck a chord with me with Dorian, because the reality is that like we could all be more successful to a degree, at least in terms of money and notoriety in business, if we were more like Dorian and less like we are, like there is something to be said for being cutthroat. I mean, I'm not going to say unfortunately, because it's fortunate that we're not like that. But the reality is that when he says things like, why would you look out for somebody else? Like, what do you have to get? It's not you. Like, why would you try to make sure this person gets let off okay? The reality is that you can't explain how to care about other people to a psychopath who doesn't fundamentally do that, right? So there's this wonderful dilemma going the whole time where that he is wrong in terms of being a human, because he's obviously this anti-empath psychopath. But you totally can see how he's risen to high levels in the company. And I mean, we see this, I think more than ever in the Me Too movement with these executives who have been so successful over time, who are horrible people who have nobody else's interests, in heart, but are able to do really well by basically just being ruthless and cutthroat and threatening people and stifling careers and controlling them like they're marionettes. And it's just this wonderful villainous aspect of like, how do you explain to somebody in that position that they should be a good person? You kind of can't. And so when they win, it's so frustrating. And I think that like there's this wonderful kind of like Grand Guignol aspect to him, with the blood on the painting and the teeth sinking into somebody. I think part of what I like about Alien in general is the body horror aspect of it, because it's kind of what I'm most afraid of. And I think Alex White does a great job throughout the book of including a lot of kind of scary moments of body horror. And a lot of them come from Dorian, because to Dorian, people are just meat, right? Like they're just, it doesn't matter. They're just in the way of him. So like, of course he would love the fact that the Snatchers can rip people apart, and he would try to do the same. And then I love how he is unable to rip. I forgot who at this point he was killing, but he was unable to rip them apart with his teeth because he's a human, right? But he's like thinking of himself as a xenomorph. And I love how he's like impotent in that moment, and he freaks out about it. And it's just, it's a wonderful new angle on villainy that I really enjoyed and was very frustrated by in a very beautiful and rewarding way. And it's funny because he is the winner of this whole story, really fundamentally. I mean, other than I guess whatever happens to Blue after the Seegson thing, but like, he got what he wanted, you know? Like, he gave birth to his perfect child, and he completed his ridiculous painting, and did it under his own terms, having basically bested most of the people on this station.
Well, speaking of the painting and the arrogance thing, and I'm sure you guys, I mean, Dorian Gray, that was also a huge part in his character as well. You guys familiar with the Dorian Gray story, right? No? Yes,
yeah.
Maybe? Yeah,
yes.
That also very.
Oh yeah,
I figured. Yeah, that's also plays a part of it too. The painting and the his arrogance, the way he goes about himself. You know, thinking his looks and his power, like you guys were saying, is all he needs. It's just a very compelling character.
And the fact that he's always looking at himself like this sort of object, like he's always like, oh, well, they're surprised that I'm as strong as I am, but like I'll straighten up to my full height and show them, you know, like just these ridiculous things. But you know there are people out there like that, like certain political figures that I won't get into, who really look at themselves like they're these like fucking, you know, these manticores, when in reality they're just these disgusting idiots. But anyway, that's beside the point. If you guys could cast this character, who would you have playing him?
What's his name? Ben Barnes. He's in. I think that's the actor's name, right? He was. He's in Westworld. Then was in The Punisher. Son of a bitch! I can't. That's who I would choose.
He's in Westworld as well.
Yeah, he's the
Ben
guy.
Barnes.
Yeah, he was. Son of a bitch! I think that's the name.
Chronicles of Narnia. I'm pulling up his IMDb page.
I think that's him.
Oh yeah, Billy Russo in The Punisher. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I think.
That's
great.
a good one. That's a good one. What about you, Clara?
That's my choice.
I think Matthew Good, who played Ozymandias in Watchmen.
That's a really
or as
that's
brunette, but he's perfect for it.
That's definitely up his alley. I would say I feel like Tom Hiddleston would do a good job.
Good choice too.
There has to be this underlying aspect of true charmingness to him, you know, like to be able to get by on like his sort of his charm and his outward appeal, when in reality he's just this desiccated nightmare internally, you know.
Yeah.
Good choice too.
So last time I wanted to just talk a little bit about Blue, because she's kind of at the center of the story, and I think there's a lot going on with her.
Sorry, my son's awake, so there might be a bit of cooing in the background.
That's okay. Hello. My cat's jumping all over me too, so it's really fun. It's sort of like cinema verite, but podcasting verite. It's like this is a real shit. You know what I mean? What do you guys think about Blue? Dave, you want to start?
Yeah, another unique character. When I first started reading, I was like, wow, this is not what I expected. I thought he did a great job of... There's the fourth member of the podcast. What I liked, I mean, I can't really get into the depths of it. I know Clara could do a better job of that than I can. What I liked is he does a good job of with her. She has her handicaps and her other thing, but what I liked is that despite all that, she's just another character. We're not sure what her real goals are. Like when you first start reading about her, I'm like, all right, she's just looking to cure herself, to make herself better. Then I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe she thinks she is, but she's not. And just like, almost the other side of the coin to Dorian, she's also willing to do whatever it takes without realizing maybe she's in the wrong or not. She just didn't didn't care. But what I also liked is that she wouldn't let any of her physical handicaps get in the way of anything she was doing. She would use as just another drive to cure herself, to get the samples, to to get home. I thought that whole part was great. She was very. It had me on the edge of the seat of maybe she's not the bad guy, maybe she is, and that her whole fighting over what she's, she has her own internal demons, and now she has these other literal demons out there. So it's almost like everything's kind of manifesting itself at one time. I thought that was awesome. And
she's so resourceful. I mean, considering the amount of things that she has to work, the amount of things that she has to work through, it's insane. Oh, and it's funny that she nominally she's on the space station RB-232 because she's in charge of Glitter Edifice, which is of course supposed to be the weaponization thing, right? It's basically it's like the program that the company is always talking about, like in every single piece of alien fiction, is weaponizing the xenomorph. But she's using it for this very really, at least in terms of the company, subversive means to basically cure her Bashara syndrome, which I think is such a wonderful thing. So the whole time, there's this constant back and forth of like, is she heroic? Is she not heroic? What does heroism mean in the context of this sort of, pre-apocalyptic universe that we're discussing? I don't know, Clara, what do you think?
Oh, there's so much stuff that I could say about Blue, but I can't do it without mentioning Marcus as well. So I hope Blue fans will forgive me. So in the beginning, we have Marcus, conducting this very, delicate procedure, and we have no idea who Blue is until we're introduced to her later. And when we are, like Dave said, we're kind of surprised by, her capabilities. And that's something that we all, I hope, could look forward to in our future, that no one will ever be completely held back by their illnesses, just like other smart minds of our time. Sorry, I can't think right now because my son's handing me stuff.
That's okay.
Just like Stephen Hawking, for example, it's a fantastic mind trapped in his body, suffering, but he still managed to accomplish so much. And I hope that in future that we will be able to, make the most of technologies so that people are able to have the capabilities to do these things. And it's fantastic that Blue Marsalis, we have this character who is, a minority woman. I think only in the EU we've only got Zula Hendricks in Defiance, who is a coloured woman who has, some
she's
sort
a little
of
disabled. Yeah, right. I mean, she's got her spinal stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but probably not to the degree that Blue Marsalis has.
No,
and
definitely not.
Yeah, and I guess people are also forced to kind of realize that there are human beings out there that suffer very similar illnesses as this. So, like, Alex came up with this illness. He made it up. It's because of years of living in zero gravity that this body comes up with this sort of like a disease that can't be cured. And then, Blue has to suffer this just because her parents' choice of lifestyle. Who hasn't been through that sort of situation? Like, you can just even have a look in the US right now, with Flint, Michigan, for example.
Right.
The longer people live there, the more each generation is going to suffer. There's going to be all of these sorts of problems that are unforeseen because of the sort of the water quality that people are having. What's to say that couldn't happen with the air quality in the future in space? So we've got all of these sorts of things to consider. But, Blue is a very driven sort of character, but as a lot of people said, that she's not a very likable character. She's all about herself. She's grown to become very isolated because of her illness, and she uses that as a reason to push people away. So,
right.
the sort of relationships she has are relationships of convenience. She doesn't have any real friends outside of her doctor, and
and she's ostracized for that, right? On the station,
Yeah.
like she's looked at as a pariah, basically.
Exactly, and who can fault her for what she has to do to try to survive? But at the same time, like, we have to, as humanity in general, we have to be careful about what sort of people we allow ourselves to become when we start using things like, finding a cure for illness as an excuse, or finding a cure for, immortality as an excuse. In the case of Peter Wayland, you know what I mean?
Right.
His whole crew was expendable, and in a way, Blue saw the rest of the people at the station expendable as well. She knew that she could get terminated from her project. Whoever was above her could get in trouble as well. Yet she went ahead and did it anyway, and it's all within her own justification that she'll find a cure to help her live. But who's to say that she will ever?
Right, but the reality is that the implications of if she were able to, which I mean, under the season auspices, one would imagine she could, if she were able to actually get the substance off and actually, isolate the healing properties of it, that she would probably be able to actually end disease, basically. So like I was saying earlier, from a utilitarian standpoint, there is something truly noble about what she's doing. But the reality is that in doing that, like you said, without even knowing if necessarily she would be successful, she's endangering the lives of, I don't know how many hundreds of people on the space station.
Yeah, and another thing as well with Blue is I really like how she decided to try to get the sample using Marcus.
Yeah,
that was cool.
A little bit of a Covenant moment there.
Did that make guys completely uncomfortable? The fact that a male character, in a way, was sucking off on a face hugger.
Yeah, that was super
really
gross.
Graphic with the whole with the whole thing. I was like, yes! I hope people are squirming. This is fantastic. I love it.
And it was so evocative, the language there about like the grittiness of like the sinews and stuff. Yeah, I remember being like, ooh.
Yeah, I really relished that point because I knew how many people would be squirming out there. So that's great.
That was awesome. And I do think I like what you said about how she mirrors Stephen Hawking in a way, because like with his amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, he was only supposed to live, until he was like in his 30s or something, and he died at the age of 76, I think, which is incredible. So like it's true, like sometimes you get these people who are so insanely driven and so full of vivacity and life and belief in themselves and belief in the infinite possibilities of the universe that they can transcend the limitations of the physical body. Of course, with Blue, she literally transcends the limitations of the physical body because she, becomes, she uses Marcus as this vessel for her to interact with her environment physically and to find love and to find physical relationships with Anne, who we haven't even talked about. But also, in addition to that, she uses things like the power loader to have immense strength. She's able to use the environment to be more powerful than Dorian, who is constantly, as he likes to remind us, a perfect physical specimen, right? like he's somebody who can do anything. He's so athletic, and he doesn't even get winded when he goes for a run. Like all these ridiculous things. But it's important that Alex White sets up Dorian as this hyper narcissistic person, because it when you see Blue crawling across the floor with her fucking feeding tube coming out and getting blisters and feeling hotness around the indentations in her stomach where her tubes connect. I mean, like, she is as vulnerable as you can be as a person, and yet she ultimately is the survivor of this crazy thing. But I love the ambivalence, and I feel like there, not to go back to Blade Runner, but there is kind of a Blade Runner moment or aspect to this, in that the hero of this thing is really not typically heroic in any way, but undergoes sort of a heroic journey. And the journey that Blue takes to ultimately being this insubordinate Seegson captive employee, I think is really exciting and really interesting and really philosophically fecund, and something that I wish we could talk more about, but we can't because this has gone on for quite a while. But I do think that we should come back to Cold Forge at some point and maybe have some more panelists on with their own perspectives, and hopefully get Alex White to come on at some point when he's done with his
maybe Dave could
tour.
do a supporting characters version of Cold Forges as well.
That would be
That'd
cool.
be cool.
I would definitely have to reread the book. That's for sure to do that.
But if you
Yeah,
do, please
that
please
sounds
have us
good.
both on, because I really want to talk more about this book. I fucking love it. It's
Me
awesome.
too.
So if
I
you've
very-
listened to this entire
Very
episode,
rarely read books, but after I read it, I'm like, I want to read this again.
right?
I think I've read it 4 times now. Or
Oh my god,
4
you're
and a
out of
half.
control. 4.5
Yeah.
times. Oh, we should mention the audiobook is coming out on July 17th.
Oh yeah, so the audiobook, Blackstone Audio are doing an audiobook of The Cold Forge, which will be out on the 17th of July, I believe. So I'm looking forward to that, because
And
then
for
I can
people
listen to
who-
it in the car.
For people who listen to audiobooks, Blackstone Audio somehow produces all of them. I don't know how it's possible. But I feel like every audiobook goes, Blackstone Audio presents. I'm like, how the fuck did they do this too? They're just incredibly prolific.
I
But
really
I'm
hope
looking
that
forward to it.
it becomes an Audible audio drama for next Alien Day. So let's start a petition, guys.
Let's do it. Oh, and we didn't even mention that this was really an Alien Day release, along with Dust to Dust.
Yes.
By the way, issue number 2 of Dust to Dust comes out in 9 days, I think, as of this
Excellent.
recording,
I'm there.
on the 11th. So that's another thing, super exciting. There's a lot of good stuff, shit going on.
For those who read the Cold Forge, the Alex White newsletter has extra little bits.
The
That has
inside
little-
track.
Has little tasty little morsels about the characters.
Yeah,
So
which
we'll
I've now
pop
signed
that
up for.
Excellent. We'll pop the link into the podcast as well, so people can sign up for it, because then you get all of this cool insider author commentary about the book, about the characters, and it's just really great to get to know how the book came about.
And he's a Formula One fan. I cannot, but I'm so happy about that. So anyway,
We haven't even had the chance to talk about all the Easter eggs in it as well. The
know.
reference to Jurassic Park.
I know exactly what you're talking about. All right, so we're gonna have another episode on this, okay? So
Yeah,
take
totally.
notes. Everybody who has not read it the 74 times that Clara has read it, or the 2 times that I read it, make sure you go back and reread it, because we're going to be revisiting this soon with some sort of a follow-up episode, and it would be great to get some fan feedback. So call the number in your show notes, send a voice memo with your thoughts on it. Participate in Building Better Worlds. Thanks to Connor Murdoch, who wrote that awesome response. Seriously, participate, because this book belongs to us now, to the fans, and this is something that we really want to engage with. So be on the lookout for supporting characters episodes, some more conversation, and quite a lot more, because this book is freaking great, and it's been a pleasure talking with you guys. Thanks for coming on.
Sounds good.
Thank you for
Stay frosty.
having us.
All
My
right,
little
bye, guys.
chest burst
Pleasure
up.
as always, Patrick. Thanks for having me on this.
Thanks,
humble
guys.
And fun episode.
See ya.
Bye.
For more on this and our other projects, please visit www.perfectorganism.com. If you'd like to join the conversation, find us on our closed Facebook group, Building Better Worlds. To support the show, please consider visiting www.perfectorganism.com/support. We've got some great perks available. And as always, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing the show. We can't tell you how much your support means to us, but we can hopefully show you by continuing to provide better, more ambitious, and more dynamic content for years to come.